The town of Harmony was a picturesque haven. Its charm wasn't just in the vibrant streets or the quaint, colorful houses, but in its people. The community bonded by a shared love for music and celebration. My name is Jamie, and as a young music enthusiast, Harmony seemed like the perfect place to start anew. I had barely unpacked my bags when I first heard of Echo. It's just an old town legend, the locals would say, often with a wistful smile. Echo wasn't your typical ghost story, but rather a spectral presence said to haunt the town's old music hall, a once grand establishment now standing desolate and forgotten. Curiosity piqued, I found myself drawn to the music hall. It was a grand, albeit dilapidated, structure that seemed to wear its history like a cloak. Its wooden panels creaked in the wind, and the once gleaming sign now hung crooked, barely legible. Pushing open the heavy doors, I stepped inside. The hall was cavernous, the air thick with the musky scent of age and neglect. Rows of dusty chairs faced a stage that had long been silent. It felt like stepping into another era, one of grand performances and thunderous applause. Now, it was just a shadow of its former self. As I walked down the central aisle, a faint whisper seemed to breeze past my ear. I paused, looking around the empty hall. The sound was fleeting, like a fragment of a melody or a half-remembered voice. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the wind or perhaps my own imagination, eager to find ghosts in every corner. But as I stood there, in the heart of the music hall, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. It was as if the air itself was charged with an unspoken story, waiting to be heard. And so began my journey into the legend of Echo, unaware of the shadows that whispered just beyond the veil of reality. Over the following weeks, my fascination with Echo transformed from a passing interest to a consuming obsession. The town's library became my second home, the dusty archives my treasure trove. I sifted through old newspapers, journals, and anecdotal accounts, piecing together the lore surrounding the music hall. According to the legends, Echo was more than just a ghost, it was a presence that thrived on sound and voice. People claimed to hear their own words echoed back in twisted forms or melodies they once held dear turned into haunting tunes. But these were just stories, right? I needed to experience it for myself. One evening, armed with a digital recorder and a skeptical mind, I returned to the music hall. The setting sun cast long shadows across the stage, and the hall seemed to hold its breath, awaiting my next move. I spoke into the silence, my voice sounding alien in the vast, empty space. "Hello, Echo. Are you here?" The words had barely left my lips when they were thrown back at me, not as an echo, but in a voice not my own. It was soft and sorrowful, like a whisper carried on the wind. My heart raced, and a chill ran down my spine. Was it real? Or was I letting the legends get to me? As I stood there, bewildered and unnerved, the whispers grew in intensity, morphing into a symphony of voices. They were indistinct, yet eerily familiar, as if dredged up from the deepest recesses of my memory. Voices of friends long gone, snippets of old conversations, laughter, and cries, melted into a cacophony that seemed to engulf the entire hall. I stumbled out of the music hall, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. What had started as a quest for the truth was rapidly turning into a nightmare. Little did I know, it was only the beginning. Echo had woven its way into my life, and the line between legend and reality was about to blur even further. In the days that followed, Echo's presence became a constant shadow in my life. The whispers followed me, seeping into my everyday existence. They echoed through the corridors of my apartment, lingered in the corners of cafes I frequented, and whispered secrets in the dead of night. Initially, I tried to dismiss it as a figment of my overactive imagination, a side effect of diving too deep into the town's folklore. But the sounds were too real, too precise. Echo mimicked the voices of people I knew, replaying fragments of past conversations, sometimes twisting them into something sinister. The more I tried to ignore it, the more persistent it became. I started to hear the whispers even in crowded places, a dissonant undertone beneath the hustle and bustle of daily life. People began to notice my growing unease, the way I'd flinch at seemingly nothing, or how I'd suddenly look over my shoulder, chasing after a voice that wasn't there. Sleep became elusive, haunted by dreams where Echo's whispers turned into screams. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the remnants of those screams still echoing in my ears. My world was shrinking, confined to a reality where Echo was ever present, a ghostly parasite feeding off my fear and confusion. Desperate for answers, I delved deeper into Echo's story. Through hushed conversations and furtive glances, I learned of a time when the music hall was the heart of the town, alive with melodies and laughter. But its downfall began with it was then that I made the connection. Echo was not just a lost soul, it was a vessel of unfulfilled desires, a spectral echo of a story left untold. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. Echo didn't just mimic sounds, it was searching for something, a voice to complete its unfinished symphony. As I pieced together this tragic puzzle, the boundary between Echo's world and mine grew thinner. The whispers turned into voices, the voices into shadows that danced at the edge of my vision. I was being pulled deeper into Echo's realm, a place where reality was distorted by the reverberations of a long-lost voice. And in that maelstrom of sound and shadow, I knew I had to face Echo, to confront the heart of the haunting, or risk being consumed by it entirely. Armed with the knowledge of Echo's tragic past and driven by a mix of fear and determination, I returned to the music hall one last time. The building loomed before me, its silhouette a stark reminder of the forgotten stories it held within its walls. Stepping inside, I felt a rush of cold air, as if crossing a threshold into another world. The hall was shrouded in darkness, save for the faint glow of the moon filtering through the broken windows. I could feel Echo's presence, a palpable weight in the air, its whispers weaving around me like a chilling breeze. I stood center stage, the very spot where countless performances had come to life, and now, where Echo seemed to be strongest. Taking a deep breath, I addressed the empty hall, my voice echoing off the decaying walls. Echo, I know your story. I know about the voice that was silenced, the masterpiece left unperformed. I'm here to listen, to understand. The response was immediate. The air vibrated with a symphony of voices, a haunting melody that resonated with pain and longing. The whispers coalesced into a tangible presence, and before me, Echo's form materialized, a ghostly figure flickering like it was a sight both terrifying and mesmerizing. Echo's figure was ever-changing, its features blurred, a mirror reflecting the faces of those long gone. But in its eyes, there was a clarity, a deep sadness that spoke of a life cut short and a story left untold. The hall was filled with the sound of an unfinished melody, a composition that tugged at the heartstrings, its notes hanging in the air like unanswered questions. Echo's voice, the chorus of many, told its tale. It spoke of dreams unfulfilled, of a voice silenced in its prime, and of the desperate need to complete its final work. As the story unfolded, the intensity of Echo's presence grew. The air around me crackled with energy, the boundary between our worlds thinning. I could feel Echo's pain, its desperation to be heard, to find closure. And in that moment, I understood what it needed from me. But understanding Echo's pain was only half the battle. As the story reached its crescendo, the haunting melody threatening to overwhelm my senses, I realized what I had to do. Echo's weakness was silence, and in this storm of sound and sorrow, I had to find a moment of quiet to break its hold. With every ounce of willpower, I stilled my breath, calmed my racing heart, and focused on the silence within me. As I did, Echo's form wavered, its haunting melody faltering in the face of the quiet strength emanating from my core. It was a battle of wills, a clash between sound and silence, as I stood my ground, determined to help Echo find the peace it so desperately sought. The silence I held was a stark contrast to the cacophony that Echo had unleashed. In this quiet standoff, Echo's form became less stable, its once overwhelming presence now flickering like a flame in the wind. The music hall, too, seemed to respond, the whispers and echoes fading into a hushed stillness. I maintained my silence, focusing on the stillness within me. Gradually, Echo's form began to coalesce into something more defined, less chaotic. The multitude of voices quieted, converging into a single clear voice. It was a voice filled with sorrow but also with gratitude. In the newfound quiet, Echo communicated its story more coherently. It spoke of a young artist, full of dreams and aspirations, whose life was cut short before they could share their final greatest work. This unfulfilled desire had anchored them to the world, transforming them into the entity now known as Echo. I listened, not just with my ears, but with my heart. I felt Echo's longing, its need for closure and peace. I realized then that Echo didn't need someone to fear it or to solve some mystery. It needed someone to understand, to acknowledge its existence and its pain. As I offered Echo this understanding, a transformation occurred. The ghostly figure began to lose its opacity, its form becoming more ethereal. The air around us lightened, as if a weight had been lifted. The music hall, too, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the oppressive atmosphere dissipating. In this moment of tranquility, Echo's presence became more peaceful. It was as if by sharing its story and being heard, it had found a semblance of the peace it had been seeking for so long. The haunting melodies turned into a soft, lingering lullaby, a final farewell from a soul ready to move on. Echo's form began to fade, its outline blurring into the air until it was no more than a whisper, a memory. As the last traces of Echo disappeared, the music hall fell silent, the spell finally. I stood there for a long time, absorbing the quiet, feeling a mix of relief and melancholy. Echo was gone, its story told and its presence released. In helping Echo find peace, I had also found my own. The shadows that had whispered in the corners of my mind had receded, leaving behind a sense of closure. As I left the music hall, I knew that its halls would no longer echo with the sounds of a tormented soul. Echo's story would live on, but not as a haunting, rather as a tale of understanding and release. And in the quiet that now filled the music hall, there was a sense of reverence, a tribute to the voice that had finally found its rest.